If you're into Makita XGT 40 volt tools, then make sure you subscribe down below, because no channel has more 40 volt reviews than this one. Here it is, I'm finally doing it. Better late than never, as they say. This was possibly the most requested video I ever had, and that was for the 18x2 Makita Plunge Saw. And now that I have it in my hot little hand, it's a bit of a waste of time, because it has, of course, been superseded by the 40 volt XGT Makita Plunge Saw. So we'll look at all the features of this new one, and then we'll see if there's anything different between the new one and the old one, and we'll do a few cuts with them, see if there's any difference in the feeling of them, and see whether it's worth getting this over this. This video has the potential to be really long, so I'm going to try and go through the features of this as quickly as I can, because else, yeah, this could be a big one. There's a lot of features on a plunge saw. So this is the Makita 40 volt SP001G 165mm plunge saw. If you're in the States, that'll be the GPS01. Now these get called a lot of things: plunge saws, track saws, rail saws. I tend to call it a track saw, but really it should be called a plunge saw, because it has a plunge mechanism that most circular saws that would run on a track don't have. And what do I mean by track? This here is a Makita track, and the saw drops on like so. Can then slide along the track and give you a nice straight cut. And what do we mean by plunge? That. Straight down into the workpiece. Can't do that with a regular circular saw. Well, you can, but it doesn't have a mechanism specially designed for doing it. You have to tilt the whole saw up and drop it in. Whereas this, the blade, whoops, careful, the blade mechanism goes down without having to move the tool itself. As compared to this, which is a regular circular saw that has a groove in the base, like the plunge saw, so it slots over the track. But it doesn't have the plunge mechanism. This is set at a certain height, so to plunge it you would have to leave it on the track, flick up the depth adjust, and then lower it in, while also getting your guard out of the way. So yeah, not quite as easy or nice or controlled, but doable if you have to. This is a good all-round saw. This is the HS004G, which you can use as a regular circular saw or chuck it on a track if you need. And the base is designed different to the HS003, which I'll probably go into in another video, because there's too much already to talk about with this particular saw. Now in this part of the world, those rails come in 1400 long, 1.4 meters, or 3 meters, and you can cut the 3 meter one down if that's a bit long. A lot of guys cut them down to sort of 2.7. A lot of people are not going to cut longer than 2.4, because that's the length of a standard sheet. So you can get the 3 meter one, cut it down to about 2.6, so you've got that overhang for starting and that sort of stuff. Or you can get connectors and stick two 1400s together. If you haven't got the space to store the big long one, or you're afraid it's going to get bent, get two 1400s, and then you've got the 1400 to go across the sheet, or you clamp them both together and then you can do the full length of the sheet, and you don't have that massive storage issue of trying to slide them in and out of your van without damaging them. It has AWS. It is variable speed. I've got a dial here from 1 through 5. 1, 5. 1 is 2,500 RPM and 5 is 4,900 RPM. Onboard tool storage for changing your blade. There's a window here for accessing your blade when you need to change it, as so, and there's a little lever on the top here which you flick round, and it will hold your blade in the right position to make it easy to remove. There's a blade lock, of course, for removing and reinserting your blades. The dust chute has detents at every 90 degrees, which is handier than you may think. Talk about that later. You have a little thumb lock here for doing score cuts. That will stop your blade from going more than a few millimeters into your workpiece. This is where you set your maximum depth of cut, and the maximum depth of cut is, well, let's go take a look. Looking at 56.5mm off the track. And and you're looking at 52 mil when it's on the rail. So you're losing about 4.5 millimeters depth of cut. How does that affect the measurements that are printed on the tool? We're set to 40 millimeter depth of cut. But we only get 36 millimeters depth of cut. Now, is there any way to adjust that depth setting so that it's accurate when it's on the track? No, there isn't. Or if there is, I haven't worked it out. It would have been so simple to either make this adjustable so it slides up and down by the 4.5 mil that you need to adjust it, or just put two lines on here. We've got the one arrow pointing to where your supposed depth of cut is. Why not just have another one 4 millimeters further down? And you could have track, no track, and just have that printed on there. Nice and simple. But instead, you've got to remember to add 4 millimeters on every time, else you're going to be cutting in the wrong place. And also this is really quite clumsy and really tight. Like you move it, you tighten it, and if you do it too tight, it's a bastard to get undone again. It seems to, I just do it like that, and then the next time you go to use it and adjust it, it's like, holy moly, both hands on there, it's like, why won't it move? So it seems to just seize up quite easily, which is a bit of a nuisance. Now if you want to do bevel cuts, you loosen this knob at the back, which also gets very tight, and the one at the front, once again, they get super tight somehow. We have some preset detents on here. We have 45 and 22.5, so you got 22.5 top and bottom and 45 left and right there. Now why does the 45 not have 45 written on it? Well, because the 45 isn't always 45. What do I mean by that? Well, down here you'll see there's a little thing you can flick up, and that turns the 45 into a 48. Now go right up to 48, put it back down, drop that back down to the 45 position, and it now stops at 45. And as well as beveling that way, there is these two little tangs here. So if you push those in, you can now reverse bevel 1 degree, or cut at -1 degree, however you want to say it. Then if I pull this back up, it's now reset back to 0 degrees. So to me, this is the one major flaw with this tool. Why, when everything else on it is designed for it to go on a track? We've got all this stuff here for the track, which we'll talk about in a second. These bevels are designed for the edge of the track. They move in a way so that it cuts in the same place on the edge of the track. Better get that in shot, eh? So it always cuts on the 0 line, not like on most circular saws. When you do a cut, you've got the 0 line, you've got a 45 line, that's about another 5 mil over. Well, when this is on a track, it's all on 0. So else you'd be cutting your track up, wouldn't you? So you chuck this on the track, got it on 45, 22.5, whatever. The cut line is always in the same place. They do have a 45 one here for when you are not using the track, but it's designed for the track. This blade depth of cut here, designed for the track. Everything on it is designed for the track except for this. Why? Especially when I hardly ever see anyone use one of these off a track. People buy these as track saws. That's what they want them for. When you buy them as a kit, it comes with a track usually. So, you know, it's a track saw. That's what it's for. So why is that designed to be used not on a track? So if you buy any of the Makita 165mm plunge saws, the 40 volt, the 18x2, the AC versions, they all have the same maximum depth of cut. So straight up and down, it'll give you a maximum depth of 56 to 56.5 millimeters, somewhere around there. 45 degrees, you'll get 40 millimeters, and 48 degrees, you'll get 38 millimeters. Makita circular saws have a trigger lock on the side here, so you push that in and then pull the trigger. With the plunge saws, it's a bit different. You push the top and then pull the trigger. But when you push down on this, it not only releases the trigger, it releases the whole saw and makes it able to be plunged. So that is now plunge worthy, and now when I pull the trigger, away she goes. You can hear it's got a nice quick brake on it. When it comes to putting it on the track, you have these two knobs here which allow you to just take some of the chatter out of it, just make sure it's running straight and not having any little wobble in it. So plonk it on your track, dial those in. Then we also have this little basically washer on a switch. Now that slots into a little slot along the edge of your track and stops it from tipping off the track. That's not all that necessary when you're doing just straight cuts like that, but when you've got it on a 45, it just wants to tip over. It's very sort of front and top heavy, so that little there helps hook into your track and stops it from doing that. You may also need to clamp your track down though, just to make sure you don't stuff up your cut. And I think that's about it for features. So let's have a look at what the difference is between this and the 18x2. When we take a look at the fronts of them there, you can see there is quite an obvious difference. But is there any difference in all the features on the tools? Well, no, not really. They are basically exactly the same. Except for you may have one of these, or you can get one of these, without an AWS chip. The AWS chip is there normally, I believe, on the 18x2. But this one is the first one they released, and they released it without an AWS. So if you get the 600, the DSP 600, that's what this is, doesn't have AWS. Get the 601, it does have AWS. When it comes to the 40 volt stuff, they didn't bother with that. It's just one model and it's got AWS. One other difference is this doesn't have a detent lock like this one does. So that can be an issue, because if this is loose, as you see, it doesn't take much for it starts to get loose. It's always going to end up flopping and hanging in one particular direction, and it might get in the way, whereas the detent just helps lock it in the position you want it in, so that your hose doesn't get in the way or the dust doesn't end up blowing in your damn face. The 36 volt also has the battery gauge, but that's completely unnecessary on the 40 volt because you've got only the one battery and you can just push it on the end like that. And the battery areas are the biggest point of difference. I really hate the look of this one. I think it's the worst looking of all the 18x2s that Makita have put out. On some tools you don't sort of really notice. It works perfect on the chainsaws, and it was okay on the hammer drill. I don't mind it on the reciprocating saw. It's okay on the miter saws, but on this it's rubbish. And on the angle grinders it's a bit clunky as well. But yeah, this one's particularly ugly and strange looking. That is one of the reasons I never got it in the first place, just because I thought they've got to come up with a better version of doing it than that. And of course they now have. Also, not a big fan of this area here. It's just a little bit too close to that battery as far as I'm concerned, where the handle is. So yeah. And it also makes a weight difference. Now Makita 18 volt batteries, from the 3 amp hour right up to the 6 amp hour, 3, 4, 5, 6, they all weigh basically the same. If you don't believe me, watch this video up in the top corner here. And so it doesn't matter what batteries you chuck on, you will get a weight of roughly 5.1 kgs. Whereas with the 40 volt, with a 2.5 amp hour battery on, not only is it way less cumbersome, you also save 500 grams of weight. This one coming in at about 4.6 kgs. If you stick the big battery on, then you're looking at the same as that for both weight and battery size. This is 36 volt 5 amp hour, that's 36 volt 5 amp hour. But you're more likely to get more work out of this one. So the battery area makes a huge difference and makes this a much nicer saw, because it's less likely to do this. When I was filming and that happened and it hit that clamp, I was really annoyed. But it proved a point beautifully. This sticks out so far. This one with the 2.5 amp hour battery is almost in line with the base. It only sticks out a fraction. Whereas this sticks out a huge amount. So while I was able to do cuts with the 40 volt, I wasn't able to do it with this 18x2 because it sticks out an extra 60 millimeters. But are there any other differences? Well, there's one that you can't see. Listen to this. So they both have a soft start and a quick break. Although the break, as you can see, is slightly quicker on the 18x2. But that's not what we're looking at here. What I want to point out that isn't visible is that this is rated at 6,300 RPM. And if you do recall, this one is only 4,900. So hang on a minute, some of you will be saying, what? It's newer technology and it's 1400 RPM slower than the old one. Why wouldn't I just use the old one? How come they haven't made it the same speed? Faster speed doesn't necessarily mean faster cutting, because if it hasn't got the torque to keep that speed up, then it's no use. These new 40 volt tools have way better management, controlling the speed so that you can have sustained speed under load. The grinders are way better for it. The 40 volt miter saw that you might have seen me review months and months ago, years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was a long time ago. No matter what battery you put on it, no matter what you're doing, it sort of holds that same speed. It doesn't drop off like the 18 volt stuff does. And if you notice, cheap tools as well, they say the higher wattage and stuff. I used to have an old Ryobi droppy and it was 2,400 watts. And I replaced it with a 1,400 watt Makita droppy, and that was so much more powerful. And it was 1,000 watts less. Huh? Yeah, because it's better designed, it's more efficient. And that's what the 40 volt stuff is over the 18 volt. And as for battery length, I haven't done a runtime test on this because it's hard finding enough things that you want to cut without ever removing the batteries and everything. So I don't know which one's going to last longer. I don't know whether you'll get the same amount of cuts with that as you will with that, but you get a decent amount with this tool. When it comes to the dust extraction, I haven't done a huge amount of tests with that, but it's not bad. I put some tape over this one day and it seemed better. So, you know, that's a place where shit can come out, but tape it up, then it's got more suction come out there, presumably. But when you start and end a cut, you do get a lot of spray of sawdust. You can't stop that. I have a heap of work coming up with this tool, but whether I will get it into this video or not is unknown at this stage. I've already had this tool kicking around here for months now, and still haven't gotten around to doing the review, so I've got to get a review of this thing out, so it may or may not be in the footage or not. We'll see. This is that point in the video where someone puts in the comment section, "Nobody uses a plunge saw like that." What I'm going to do is cut some 200 by 50 or 8x2s. I'm going to rip them in half. It's sopping wet, rough sawn, so it's a full depth of cut of 50mm. People are going to want to know, is this more powerful than this? And the best way to do that is to really make them strain. So cut and sopping wet 2-inch thick timber is a fairly good way to test that. Okay? This saw also comes with AFT, which is Active Feedback Sensing Technology. Should be AFST really, shouldn't it? Think of it kind of like anti-kickback. It's on this tool, it's on some of the rotary hammer drills, angle grinders. It won't prevent total kickback, but it will slow it down. I'll give you a demonstration in a moment. But with a plunge saw, you are more likely to get kickback than with a standard circular saw, unless of course you're plunging it. Because with a standard circular saw you usually come into the piece of timber that you're cutting, and so it's just the front part of the blade that is in contact with the timber. When you plunge, you've got all the way around, front to back. The blade is encompassed by wood, and it doesn't take much to slow that down, and then it touches the back, rides up, pops out, and the saw comes up towards you. When the tool kicks back, it's kicking back towards you. But thankfully, with the AFT, it will cut out pretty quick. Let's take a look. Right, what haven't I discussed yet? You can get an optional base for along the front here. They call it a sub base, kind of like a rip guide, straight fence type thing. Doesn't come with it in this part of the world. Also, the AWS. Sometimes you'll get it in a kit often, but not with a bare tool. Haven't really talked much about the scoring cut, have I? If you're new to plunge saws and you're wondering why there's a score cut, why you'd want to cut 2 to 3mm deep, these tools get used a lot by cabinet makers, guys cutting kitchen bench tops, guys cutting laminated plywood, that sort of thing. If you're cutting something with a veneer on it, it's super important that you don't get any splinters or any tear out. Doing a very shallow cut with just the tips of the teeth gives you a far better likelihood of doing a nice smooth cut with no damage. Once you've done that, you can then go back over the same line because you've got your track there, the saw's in the same place, so you then plunge a bit deeper and do your full cut. So that's what that little scribe lock button thing there is for, which I told you about at the beginning of the video, I do believe. Whether you have the 18x2 or the 40 volt, this is the blade that comes on it when you buy it, and yeah, the best one to use when you need to replace it. It's the B57358. I'll put some links down below to the blades and to these, of course. If you're in New Zealand, it'll probably be handy hardware. Take a look down there. So is the new 40 volt better than the old 18x2? Yes, it is. It's far less cumbersome. As you can see, it's much narrower tool. It's nicer to use. It maintains good cutting speed under load. This one struggles a bit at times with dense timber and thick timber. So you get a faster, more consistent cut with the 40 volt. Is it worth upgrading from this to this if you already have this? Well, that's up to you. If you're happy with this, then I'd just stick with this. There's not that big a jump in difference really. But if you're starting from scratch, of course, then this is a far superior tool. If you're after just a track saw, i.e. you just want to cut straight lines, you don't necessarily want the plunge feature of these two tools, then don't forget the HS004G. Because you can use it as a standard circular saw, and then it's got that groove in the base for chucking on your track. The other two in the back there, the plunge saws, you don't want to use those as a standard circular saw because A, you've got to keep doing that plunge thing, which is kind of awkward when you just want to rip a piece of timber. This you set to your depth and away you go. These you've got to always have the pressure down on it with your hand. As soon as you let go, the blade pops back up. So if you were to only get one circular saw, I wouldn't get a plunge saw. I would be more inclined to get that, which we will go into detail a bit more in another video. So if you're into Makita XGT 40 volt tools, then make sure you subscribe because I've got more reviews on this channel than anybody has on that particular platform. There's some of the ones we've done recently, the cool little dust blower, router, chainsaws. There's quite a few of them in there now. There's a heap more to come. The next review will probably be a 40 volt one the way we're going. There's so many for me to get through. 18 volt LXT heat guns coming up soon too as well, so make sure you subscribe, hit the little bell next to subscribe, hit the thumbs up, all that stuff, and yeah, I'll see you on another one real soon. Cheers guys.